Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. With high unemployment, why exactly are homes selling at a frenetic pace and for higher prices than ever? Then we talk about the highest cash-flowing hands-off investment that I know about anywhere today on Get Rich Education. Congress just made it possible to get up to $100,000 out of your current 401k or TSP to invest in real estate, gold, or even your own business. That's even if you're still working, and avoid the IRA UBIT tax. The thing is, you can get your money tax and penalty free for a limited time. The EQRP is your secret weapon. With the CARES Act expiring soon, the EQRP company helps you unleash your retirement funds now. Learn more and text message EQRP in all capital letters to 72,000.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE, from Fredericton, New Brunswick to Frederick, Maryland, and across 188 nations worldwide. I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education. At times, I am still asked about how homes can be selling so briskly in the United States amidst these historically high unemployment rates. And within this current recession, one big reason is because those that have assets and income, well, suddenly they have fewer places to spend that income because more businesses are closed and more travel options are closed. And call these people the haves as opposed to the have-nots. Well, since the haves are more likely to have these knowledge-based jobs, they're ones that continue to be employed. They can work from home. And since they don't have the spending options like they used to, well, then that means that they do have this money that they're building up in order to spend elsewhere. And that's where the money comes from in order to go into housing. In my opinion, that is a bigger reason for this housing run-up than low mortgage rates are, although the rates sure help. Now that the home has become the center of your universe, it's not only where you sleep, but it's more likely to be your office and your gym. Well, the haves are more likely then to spend money on that center of their universe home. Now, with low interest rates, say that you want to sell your $500,000 home and trade up to a $900,000 home. Well, that home costs 80% more, but with low interest rates, you might only have to pay 25% more in a monthly payment, not 80% more, and yet you get 80% more home. People buy things more so based on the monthly payment than they do the total price. Well, that's just what the haves are doing. The have-nots are the ones more likely to be unemployed because they had a service-based job like serving food at a restaurant that's now closed. That's exactly what has contributed to the phenomena that I talked about 2 weeks ago at the beginning of the show, where we now have an astounding 52% of young people, age 18 to 29, that live at home with their parents. That's more than at any time, even before the Great Depression of the 1930s. That's part of the pent-up housing demand that we're going to have when we get back close to full employment, because those younger have-nots are going to crave to move out of their parents' home and form their own household. Another part of why housing demand has surged in the pandemic is that government intervention. In the 2008 crisis, if you remember, the Fed was in denial about what was happening. Well, this crisis, they rushed in, they dropped rates, and they printed $4 trillion. People are not fleeing away from real estate right now like they did in the 2008 downturn. Conversely, they are fleeing to it. In 2008, people were turning in their house keys and walking away. Housing was overbuilt, and now people are trying to snatch keys away from anyone that's holding onto a set of house keys, trying to snatch them out of their hand. Housing is underbuilt. That's what's happening. Now, Zillow recently reported on an interesting factor that's part of the chronic shortage of housing today, they found that 34% of would-be home sellers said that they're no longer going to sell because of pandemic uncertainty in the market. Let's call these people clingers. If you've got a good home, you're more likely to want to hold on to it even if you had considered selling it previously. It's just another factor that keeps housing supply low. These houses are not coming out of the market for sale at all. Now, fortunately, there is available housing inventory. Some of it's new construction and some of it's existing renovated property at greturnkey.com. For example, 3 Florida providers there are building new entry-level homes. I would call those priced at $250K and below, and they are the ones that America most needs. These are homes where the numbers often work for you to own them and rent them out to others. They're designed to be buy-to-rent properties, not a primary residence for you. You'll also find our provider of new fourplex buildings across the Intermountain West there. Yes, this is something new that we're doing. And the fourplex building, that is long going to have a special place in my heart because it's where I got my start in real estate investing with that $295,000 fourplex where I lived in one unit and rented out the other 3. This provider of new fourplexes operates in Utah, Idaho, and Arizona. So learn more about them and all of our providers, and more seem to be providing new construction over there at greturnkey.com. Hey, did you know that there is a new retail store chain that I actually think is going to have a lot of success in the pandemic? Did you hear about this one? Yes, a certain store that will actually get more business in the pandemic. It'll probably actually have to close when the pandemic is over. And the New York Times was reporting on this. That store is the COVID-19 Essentials store. They are cashing in on the trend, I guess. The first store opened in Miami back in June, and locations have since opened in New Jersey, Nevada, and elsewhere. It includes how you can have your own personalized mask made, even from materials like cotton and silk. If you're willing to fork over $129, you can get an electric mask sold at the store that has a rechargeable battery and a fan to cool your face. Well, though that seems inconceivable to some people, you know what else is inconceivable in the retail landscape? It's that many people pay a $2 to $3 surcharge just to withdraw a $20 bill from an ATM. Well, that's profitable for the ATM owner. Yes, we're talking about automated teller machines, a small piece of real estate, if you will, an electronic box that's actually the highest cash flowing investment for the owners and investors of these ATMs, perhaps higher than I've ever heard about, certainly for a hands-off investment. We're going to talk about that today. Now, I actually do use an ATM sometimes. Maybe every 2 months or so. I withdraw cash really to use it for 2 main reasons: as gifts and as a tip, like for a bellhop or something. Today's guest is going to tell us more about how ATMs are so lucrative for individual ATM owners like us. Most people think that banks own their own ATMs, but a lot of times that's not true. Now, interestingly, though, my friend and guest here has had so much success with helping other people become ATM owners that he's become one of the 5 biggest ATM operators in the nation, he'll tell you that he's not an ATM user himself. You know, it's so easy for everyone to fall into their own echo chamber and move and think in lockstep with everybody else in their peer group, and I am definitely prone to do it too. Anymore, I actually relish the opportunity to get around people that probably think and live differently than me. It's good for me to be exposed for that. In fact, when I make small talk with the woman that cuts my hair, she told me the other day that she uses ATMs when I was kind of hinting around about it. Let's talk more about how these tiny rectangular pieces of real estate are probably the highest cash flowing vehicles that I know about, and they're hands-off and have a reliable income stream. This week's guest is a successful business owner, syndicator, and an investment and tax strategist, and he's acquired more than $150 million worth of real estate since 2010, and that includes several thousand multifamily apartment units, self-storage facilities, and even clean energy distillation units. His team is now one of the top 5 ATM operators in the country, and he and his wife Susan, along with their 4 children, live in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Welcome back to Get Rich Education, Dave Zook.
Keith, thanks for having me back.
It was 1 year ago around this time when my wife and I stayed at Dave's home, and one day Dave and I went running along Pennsylvania's Pequea Creek, and I didn't expect to have to struggle to keep up with you on the run, Dave. You were breaking me down there.
I'm like a fine wine. I get better as I age.
You sure do, and health is wealth. So a few years ago, to go back further, I asked you about the highest cash flowing investment that you offer. And what that is the opportunity for an individual investor to own a lot ATMs. You were here on the show to discuss it with us a while ago, and a number of Get Rich Education listeners have since invested with you. And I want to follow up on the experience, including pandemic-induced change to the ATM industry. But first, let's go bigger picture and talk longer term about the viability of cash now that you have the proliferation of things out there like Apple Pay and Google Wallet and Bitcoin. So tell us about the trend of cash use.
That's a great question. On my last newsletter that I just sent out last week, I talked about that very thing, and I showed an actual chart. It's one thing to talk about it, but when you get the actual data and you can actually see what's happening, people think that cash use is declining. It's really not. It's increasing. One of the things that we keep a close eye on, obviously, because it's our business, but that's important to us. And when you see that and you see not only external market research, but then we can see exactly what's going on inside of our funds, that's even more telling. When we look at that and we see what's really going on, many of the folks who invest in ATMs have a problem with that one because they never use ATMs. I own hundreds of ATMs personally. I couldn't get cash out of one if I wanted to. I don't have an ATM card. So typically, an ATM investor is not an ATM user, and that's why some people struggle with it. They think that since they quit using cash and converted to plastic, that means everybody else has too, and it's just not true.
That's a great point, because you, as an investor, are successful to the extent in which you understand your user, much like if you own a pretty lavish home, but yet you invest in workforce housing in the midsection of the country to someone else. So you wouldn't live in a product like that, but there's a demand for others to do it. And we know that cash use, for example, is actually up year over year. It's up 5% last time I checked.
And you're right. And I actually used that same analogy that you just mentioned to a wealthy investor. And I said, well, look, you invested with me in multifamily apartments. Would you live in one of those multifamily apartments, C-class multifamily apartments? And, of course, the answer was no. So that's exactly right. Understanding the demographic that you're serving, and not just in the ATM business, I'm talking any business, understanding the demographic of folks that you're serving is one of the most important things that you can do as a business owner.
The person that washes dishes at a restaurant and has an income of $28K, they're just not likely to adopt things like Apple Pay or to be investing in and trying to use cryptocurrency, for example. And when we talk about how that cash, which has seen year over year increases in use, we're talking about the delivery of that cash through the vessel of an ATM. And ATMs themselves have been around a lot longer than people think. In fact, the first ATM was put in use in New York State in 1969. So they've been around for over 50 years themselves. I remember growing up around 1990 in upstate Pennsylvania and always seeing this blue banner with the MAC ATM around, MAC, Money Access Center. So ATMs have been around for an awfully long time. It's certainly not any sort of fad.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I remember before, when you called it an ATM machine, it was a Mac machine, and I didn't even know what those letters, what that abbreviation was about or what that stood for. So thanks for bringing that out.
Yeah, it's really been part of our American vernacular for an awfully long time. But let's talk about what's happened in the pandemic. A lot of people have got to be wondering, well, doesn't that cause a reduction in foot traffic? Would that result in less ATM use then? Tell us about that.
So that's where the geographic location, we talked about demographics, and That's where the location is very important, because I had conversations with other ATM operators, and these were mom and pop operators, and some of their transaction volume was down as much as 80%.
Gosh.
When I got to asking questions, I was like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. Our portfolios are doing just fine. The problem was many of their locations were in restaurants and bars, as is the fact for many mom and pop operators. So ATM locations became very important, and institutional grade locations, institutional grade meaning, I'll give you an example, high foot traffic deli on a street corner in Manhattan, considered an institutional grade location. And these are not one-offs. It's not like a mom and pop operator could go to this deli and say, like, I want to put an ATM in this location. We're taking down 200 or 300 of those locations in one shot, and it could be a chain deli. That's where it became very important, but we didn't totally escape any negatives from the pandemic. Still do. We have exposure in a lot of airports, which are also normally considered a very stable, very good institutional grade location. Well, in
Right.
the last 8 or 9 months, not so much. Now it's coming back a lot. We can talk about our business model a little bit, but it's important to not just have all your eggs in one basket. When we operate ATMs in a fund, an investor coming into the fund is investing in a broad range of ATMs, not just their ATMs, but it gets blended in the fund. So let's say if your ATM transaction volume drops off the cliff because you were in an airport, now some of the ATMs that the transaction volume spiked way up is helping to provide some stability in the portfolio.
So your portfolio of ATMs has been somewhat buffered by the downturn that we've seen in foot traffic in restaurants, in bars, in airports. Where are some of those favored institutional grade locations where your ATMs have continued to thrive?
Most of our locations are in essential businesses. A lot of these businesses are open 24/7. I gave you the example of the high foot traffic deli on a street corner. Lots of Walgreens, lots of fast food chains. Those places are open and they serve our demographic of folks. We're not going to go into Ruth's Chris. It's not our demographic. Will we be in a McDonald's in New York City? Most likely. So it really had to do with location. And that was the number one reason why we did so well right through the pandemic, was we were in those really good, essential, institutional grade locations.
One thing that's changed in the pandemic is that some people cannot go inside to banks and see bank tellers at all anymore. So ATMs and mobile branches became more popular in a sense due to COVID, depending on that location. And another thing to keep in mind is that people are not using ATMs just for cash access. Tell us more about some of those other uses of ATMs.
There's a lot of new uses for ATMs in the pipeline. Some of them are under NDA, and I can't talk about some of them, but just think about check cashing, thinking about crypto, think about the Western Union model where it took 10 or 15% of your check to send money home. Those are all things that you're now able to do with an ATM, and there's more coming. There's a lot more coming. We're going to be using ATMs in 5 years from now that you haven't even thought of at this point right now.
Again, it's about thinking about your clientele. Who is that ATM user? A lot of times, they're just not the type of people you hang around with, and they just have spending and behavioral patterns that are different from yours. In fact, some use ATMs for EBT cards. Some use ATMs with their government-issued stimulus cards. Those are things that can be cashed at an ATM. Tell us more about that.
Think about that for a second. What was going on right in the middle of the pandemic, and who knows where the middle is. Me being the optimist, I'm hoping, we're right around the corner and things are going to get a lot better. So the middle for me would be whatever, June, July, August. Well, what was happening throughout that whole time? The government was sending out these cards that were coming filled with currency units. And what are they going to do with those cards? Many of those people went straight down to the ATM and pulled cash out. That was not only a stimulus for that person, but it was a stimulus for investors investing in our portfolio.
That's right. Now, although it seems inconceivable, many people are willing to pay a $2 to $3 surcharge just to withdraw a $20 bill. That's why this can be profitable for you, the investor. Yes, that's almost incomprehensible that a person would really pay a negative 10 to 15% return just to get their portrait of Andrew Jackson. But those are the type of people we're talking about serving here. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Our guest is Dave Zook. We're going to talk more about ATMs when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Most rental property investors choose either positive cash flow or home price appreciation, but one real estate market can provide both. Jacksonville, Florida, with 9% lower home prices than the national median, 1% higher gross rents, and Jacksonville has appreciated 34% more than other comparable cash flow markets since 1991. Get positive cash flow today and appreciation for tomorrow. To invest for cash flow and growth in Jacksonville, go to cashflowandgrowth.com. The people that our listeners can't stop talking about are Ridge Lending Group and MLS 42056. They provided you with more loans than anyone. It's where I got my last few loans, and they finance single-family income property up to fourplexes. They're the number one lender for both beginners and veterans. Start your pre-qualification, chat with President Chaley Ridge personally, and you'll end up with your custom plan for expanding your cash flowing portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is Peak Prosperity's Chris Martinson. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. We're talking with Dave Zook, the real asset investor, about how an individual investor like you can invest in a lot of ATMs. Dave, tell us more about how the performance has gone in the pandemic. We talked about how some of those behavioral changes were taking place, but how has the fund actually performed now that we're several months deep into the pandemic?
It was quite interesting to watch. We watched a huge spike early on, then we watched it drop off some. So there was some volatility in the fund, but a very interesting thing started happening in about July. For the month of July and forward, so July, August, September, we've been seeing year over year growth, meaning inside the portfolio, that portfolio is doing better in July of 2020 than it did in July of 2019.
Wow.
And forward. So we're seeing year over year growth, and we couldn't be more excited. One of the things that I usually do when I'm looking at investment, I usually go back and think, okay, how did this thing fare in 2008, 9, and 10? Now we can look in 2020, and we're excited.
One of the things that's really given strength and solidified the investment is the fact that you are the fifth largest operator in the nation. That does give you some competitive advantages. For example, I know that really for a long time now, you have not tried to be the pioneer and put ATMs into new locations, but rather use ATMs at proven foot traffic locations.
That's important for an investor to understand too, because when you do that, you're reducing a lot of risk. When you put an ATM in a brand new location, you guess about how much that machine will bring in transaction volume. You can make an educated guess. But when you can go in and you can see, okay, this is a proven location, and you can look back 3 to 5 years and see exactly how many transactions that location has produced, you're really reducing a lot of risk. And about 99% of the time, that's what we're doing.
Yeah, you're eliminating that guessing. Well, let's learn more about how the investment works. Tell us more there.
Much like an investor or a promoter will many times start C-class apartment complex as an investor, and they'll move up to the B class and sometimes the A class. They'll move up their game. That's what we're doing. We're upping the quality of the location. And when you do that, when you start getting into locations over the last couple of years, we've started getting into locations that the transaction volume is through the roof. It requires a better machine. It requires a more expensive machine. There's some of these ATMs they've got multiple interfaces where a couple people can transact at the same time. We're selling those at 6 ATMs now. Your minimum investment for one unit of 6 ATMs is $104,000. And we can go through the breakdown, the economics. Really, an investor will come in, invest $104,000. Your monthly distribution for that investment is $2,184 per month, and the contract is set up for a 7-year contract period.
That is a nice stream of income, $2,184 per month when you own 6 ATMs for a lifespan of 7 years. How predictable is that income stream historically?
Well, we've never missed a payment, a monthly distribution payment, and we've never deferred or even not hit our pro forma. I've been doing this since 2012. It's been very steady. And I don't know if you remember, Keith, but the last time I was on your show, that number was $2,125 a month. It just goes to show the strength and the viability of cash, which we talked about earlier, the strength of the portfolio. As it gets stronger, we've actually been able to share some more of that revenue. So we're up almost $60 from the last time we talked.
That's right. That really is remarkably steady. And this is a cash flow centric investment for you, the investor. So after your 6 machines use has been pretty much terminated after the end of 7 years, you oftentimes can sell those, but you're really not going to get much out of it. So it's more of a cash flow type of investment. Tell us more about how the investment's structured, Dave, and just how someone participates.
You're right. After 7 years, I mean, it's a little bit like owning a laptop. And after 7 years, your investment's really not worth anything. Look at an investment in the ATM space as you're really buying a cash flow stream and a tax benefit. The ATM is a steel box that's delivering you those products, delivering you a tax benefit and an aggressive cash flow play. And that's it. At the end of 7 years, there's not much value left. You just sell it for fair market value, which is a couple $1,000s.
So much of the investor's ROI then is in that cash flow. There is a tax advantage. Tell us more about that ROI and how that's comprised.
When you look at this from an IRR component, which is really what you have to use here when you compare it with, say, a self-storage investment or a multifamily apartment investment, because when you look at strictly the cash flow, it's not quite fair. Your cash flow, straight up cash flow, is like 25% annualized. So you really got to look at the IRR. The IRR in this investment is somewhere around 19%. That's considering your cash flow, your loss of value of your equipment, and the tax benefit. One of the things, I was never legally allowed to talk about this before, Keith, on your show, because in prior years, we had only been able to rule out bonus depreciation to family, friends, current investors, and I couldn't get on the air and talk about it.
Okay.
But this is now a 506c investment, which allows me to get on a show like yours and talk to your folks. So one of the big pieces to this investment is not only the straight out cash flow play, but also the tax impact that you can get from an investment like this. So we're offering on this new portfolio that we've got open 100% bonus depreciation in year one. Prior to this, it had been structured where your depreciation was spread out over 5 years. So if you're a high net worth individual investor and you got tax problems coming up toward the end of the year, this is a vehicle that I personally use to reduce or eliminate my tax problem.
That is a fantastic boon and a real benefit. In addition to that cash flow stream, again, the highest cash flowing investment that Dave offers in everything that he does, and he helps you come alongside him with what he's doing. Does one need to be an accredited investor in order to get in?
Yes, you do need to be an accredited investor to play in this game.
And just as a reminder, the SEC, which is the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, states that to be an accredited investor, one must have an annual income of at least $200,000 or $300,000 married with their spouse. They need to have had that income for each of the last 2 years, or you can have a net worth of $1 million yourself or $1 million along with your spouse, and home equity in your primary residence does not count towards that designation. That's really it generally, without getting down into every detail. Dave, one interesting thing is I know that since you were last here, you've responded to what a lot of investors had asked more about, and that is with your reporting and breaking down your report. So does the investor know, for example, where those individual ATM locations are physically?
There's a couple things there, and I'm glad you brought that up, because there was coming through April, May, June, there were a lot of worried investors out there, and they were asking questions about, even though they were still getting their monthly distributions, they wanted more clarity into the fund. And I would say, well, wait a minute, it shows it right there on your monthly income statement. It shows the transaction volume and it shows the money that was generated in a fund. But when we got to trying to figure out how we could provide more clarity. The problem with that was every month you'd have additional ATMs that were being added into the fund. So the numbers were a little bit skewed. So we figured out a way, or we just came up with, well, let's provide the clarity we're asking for. So what we did is on a monthly basis now, that investor will see exactly how many ATMs are in the fund, exactly how much money was generated through transaction volumes. And now they can see with a little bit of math, they can see exactly how many transactions on average per ATM that's going on inside the fund. So it gives transparency and clarity into the fund. They can see the health of each ATM in the fund. It was a way that we were able to just provide more clarity to ease investors' concerns, because they were obviously getting hit with some other investments that were not doing as well.
Let's call you Dave Open Book Zook. So with each $2,184 monthly payment comes that report, like you just stated. That's really great at giving us insights, and you've really responded to what your investors have requested that way. So is there any last thing that a prospective ATM investor should know, Dave?
I believe we covered a lot, Keith, but I would just tell you that most of the people that are coming into the fund are repeat investors. And, that says a lot for the stability and performance of the fund. People are coming back for more. In fact, most of our business now is from repeat investors. Behind that is referrals.
Wow, that says an awful lot. So you can learn more and get the report that Dave has put together for you. You can get that at getricheducation.com/ATM. Learn more about the pros and cons and the cash flow stream that continues to attract people to this investment and keeps them being those repeat investors. Dave, it's been great having you here back on the show.
Thanks for having me back, Keith. It was fun.
Now, if you're of the mindset that cash is going to die really soon, like in just the next few years, then you probably would not be interested in investing in ATMs, and then you probably shouldn't do that. But it really does look like it will be a long time before cash dies. Most anyone is in agreement that it is going to have a way longer lifespan than the 7-year term of this investment. Wouldn't it be interesting to know what the CEOs of electronic and phone app-based payment systems would say about the future of cash use, like the CEOs of PayPal and Square? Well, actually, we do know about that. In fact, I think the most compelling statement, it came from the CEO of Venmo, the electronic payment system. His name is Michael Vaughn. He said it's still decades and decades and decades until cash goes away. It's going to take our lifetime and our kids' lifetimes before you start to see this work itself out, meaning it'll take that long before cash dies. PayPal CEO Dan Schulman said something similar. He said that cash won't die in the next decade or two. I read more about ATM usage patterns myself recently, simply starting out by Googling ATM usage patterns. And one interesting study showed that in the pandemic, ATM use has not declined dramatically. It went on to presume that in pandemic times, though people don't have as many places to spend their cash with some businesses closed, that the reason ATM use is still strong is that people want to withdraw cash so that they can store cash in the pandemic. I thought that was interesting, and that made some sense to me, especially when one study during pandemic usage times here, it showed that though people made fewer overall ATM visits, the overall volume of cash withdrawn was still about the same. So per withdrawal, you had bigger withdrawals made, and that would kind of correlate with this storage hypothesis. 45 million Americans still don't have access to payment systems other than cash. That's about 30% of U.S. households. In fact, today, the most frequently used payment system in America is still cash. It's more than electronic, debit, credit, or checks. Well, if you're more of the young, scrappy investor type, well, then the time probably is not right for you for this, since you do need to be accredited. But if you're a higher net worth, a high earner, the hands-off type, then this could very well provide you with a nice stream of reliable cash flow. In your investor life, your cash flow is durable to the extent that you have diverse income streams, and this one sure checks that box. You can own 6 ATMs with a 104K minimum investment for a monthly income stream of $2,184, and that would be for 84 months, a 7-year hold period. So that's 104K per unit of 6 ATMs. Some GRE listeners have bought more than one unit, so then 12 or 18 ATMs. Each unit buys 6 steel boxes that provide both a big cash flow stream and a tax benefit. The bonus depreciation is a major benefit here for end of the year tax planning. If you're an accredited investor, get the report to learn more. You'll see the numbers and you'll have Dave's contact information too. Get started at getricheducation.com/ATM. Until next week, when I'll be back to help you build your wealth, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.